Welcome to this session in which we are going to be discussing the final Babylon. And before we take questions, I just want to say that in 30 years of studying the subject of Mystery Babylon, much has been written. And this represents, I think, a next step in the thinking, and by the way, a major step. And having said that, my friend right here, Douglas Woodward, what can I say about Doug except that he's a hard-working guy, and he and I have had a lot of conversations, and he's a deep thinker. And Doug, would you introduce the gentleman to your right?
I would be happy to. Yes, in fact, it's ironic. We've actually written the book together, and we only met face-to-face in person for the first time about 3 days ago. So we've been communicating back and forth with obviously email, and I've been reading things they've written, and they've been reading things I've written, and we've been using Skype, but I still had a hard time recognizing them when I finally saw them. So, is that you, Dean? Is that you, Doug? So, anyway, so let me start on the far end. Douglas Krieger. Douglas has had quite an interesting background, all the way from a street preacher in the Jesus movement to actually he did a show with J.R. Church 30 years ago on the issue of the land of Israel, the Temple Mount, and is quite a scholar in many areas. Has a specialty in sacred geometry, not mysticism, but really understanding the numbers of Scripture and the providence of God in that. And has continued to just write, as much as I write, he writes a lot more than I do. And probably a little bit more, probably a little bit higher quality too. But anyway. And then to his left, my right, Dene McGriff. Dean has had also, he and I have a lot in common. We've both been management consultants. We've worked with what used to be called the Big 8 firms. Now they're known as the Final Four. With the collapse of Anderson Arthur Anderson and so forth.
AIG.
All these things, yes. And so Dean has had a lot of experience working with U.S. aid and the foreign aid, worked in embassies around the world. So he's seen sort of the U.S. in action in terms of what we do and how we do it, how the information that we put together in terms of financial aid might filter into the hands of the dark side, well, our CIA and so forth. And so he's been extremely helpful in helping us to look at the commercial, financial, economic issues that are really at the heart of the financial Babylon. So with that, if I could maybe just talk for another 30 seconds or so, maybe about your families and kind of where you live and all that.
My background is pretty diversified. Over the last 20 years, I've been in education, public schools, as a director of career preparation and a principal of several charter schools and the like. And so my background is in pretty varied, from mathematics to you name it, on all subjects, certified and everything. And then, of course, I'm married to Deborah for over 43 years and have 3 lovely children, and one of whom is a rabid, prophetic folk music artist. With his group, you probably heard some of his music along the way, and there's some of you who have his CD. I ran out of his CDs, but I'm trying to convince Bob Ulrich to consider having a prophetic band. Not any kind of a band, but a prophetic band. And
we'll take that under advisement.
Yes, under advisement. And it wouldn't cost you anything. Just bring him on in and let him sell a few CDs. They'll be fine. Yep. And so, but we've been, over the last 10 years, operating a website. Everything from controversial subjects like, what was Stonehenge really all about, to issues on the suffering church and issues relative to, of course, the prophetic timelines and prophetic subjects in general, especially the New Jerusalem and the preparation of the bride of Christ, and our witness and testimony as brethren. That's a little introduction for me.
Keep it brief.
Yeah.
I've only been married 48 years, known him for 50, and
that's serious stuff. Something going on here.
3 lovely girls, more education than I ever needed. Didn't do me much good. And 30 years as a consultant internationally, and traveled and lived all over the world.
Great. Thanks, Dean. Gary.
Well, I want to say right up front, it's not called Mystery Babylon. for nothing.
Yeah.
Revelation really speaks of a mystery, and a lot of people over the years have been trying to nail down what exactly is Babylon. And it's been a gradual process, and if you have a question, and make it a good one, because these guys have given it a lot of thought, we're kind of dealing with the subject. What is Babylon? And you ready to field a question?
Sure.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Who has a question?
Yes, sir.
I had a question about Revelation chapter 18, I believe specifically. When I first read that for myself about 20 years ago, the first thing that came to my mind was that this was describing New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what your thoughts are on that. You know, with
Okay.
a lot of it being the center of the UN, the World Church, and the financial center of the
Okay.
world. And then
But just for purposes of the folks that are watching us on video, or TV later, because kind of repeat that, given Revelation 18 seems to refer to, does it refer to New York City? And could that be possible? What do you think, Doug?
Well, if it quacks like a duck, waddles like a duck, and swims like a duck, and it looks like a duck, in all likelihood, it probably is a duck. Now, with that superficial introduction, I would say that it is a city. It's a mystery, first of all. And mysteries, if you love a good mystery, you need to solve the mystery. And it's the resolution of that mystery through the last 2,000 years of church history, if you would, that has progressively gone from here to there. Now, this is a true confession time, too, and I've told some of you this. I'm a direct descendant of Martin Luther, who believed that Babylon the Great was, of course, the entire Roman Catholic system. And so in that sense, we've labeled that for, I don't know how many years, David Hunt's book in particular, The Woman Rides the Beast. The only thing is that she is devoured by the beast after her use is over with, if you would. And then, of course, Revelation 18, to be specifically targeted. As you read that, that is a huge commercial enterprise. The merchandisers weep. It's very interesting that as she goes up in smoke, the weepers, and it's repeatedly, they're weeping on several occasions, that they're no longer able to traffic in the bodies and souls of men. That's a very poignant expression.
They are merchants.
They are merchants to the core. And she obviously is a great consumer nation that will merchandise, and she is trafficked in merchandising by sea, and it's directly by sea. So you'd have all these ships coming in and out, and all the ports, and she dwells on many waters. We could go on, but yes, insofar as the city per se, David Wilkerson went right into Times Square, and he declared that I'm right in the midst of Babylon the Great, and someday it will be judged. That's up to the Almighty. I would have to say that the description with the World Bank, the Fed, the UN, the IMF, between Washington and New York, and the stock markets, the exchanges, the NASDAQ,
Yeah, good point. Let's let Dean talk a second, if you would, about some of the financial commercial center of New York City, and maybe make a comment or two about that. Is it likely that the commercial center of New York will continue to be that commercial center for the foreseeable future, do you think, Dean?
I mean, it certainly will. And these things, for people looking for it to crumble down, Rome didn't fall overnight. It took 500 years. So no matter, we know the financial system isn't sustainable, but on the other hand, it's just got to be there long enough, right? And that's to wrap this thing up. So we are, as Americans and American CEOs, are sitting on interlinked boards, all over the world, all over Europe, all over China. We have our tentacles out, and it's the commercial empire aspect of it, which is the tentacles that reach everywhere. It's just ubiquitous. And the financial center is New York City.
And if I could add one more thing to that, is this. The king of Tyre and the daughter of Tyre have been hiding out. Okay, now what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is we've dumped a lot of stuff on the king of Babylon. But he is expressed in the king of Tyre in his commercial side of things. Now, the book goes into copious detail with regards to the daughter of Tarshish and the king of Tyre, and what was all that about? We talk about the word Canaan. There's a verse at the end of Zechariah that's very interesting, and it says, "Never again shall the Canaanite be found in the house of the Lord." This is millenarian in its essence, and what it's getting at is that the word Canaan literally means merchant. My Father's house shall not be called a house of merchandise. And what happened with Jezebel is that as the daughter of Ithbaal, he became the first king priest that the scriptures mention in the Phoenician Sidon and Tyre. And he assassinated the legitimate king of Tyre at the time and became the priest king. He was the high priest of Ishtar. And what happened after that is, if you would, he was a murderer from the beginning. His daughter was Jezebel. And Jezebel linked up with Ahab as a commercial convenience and brought apostasy into the religion of Yahweh. She is wholly implicated as the one ultimately, if you would, riding upon the beast. She meets all the qualifications, and she is devoured as Jezebel was thrown out of the window. Every part of her was devoured by dogs. In case you're wondering why no dogs are allowed in the kingdom. I hate to, because there's no problem with apostasy anymore. Okay, so the dogs devour her. Not a bad insight, actually. But they don't eat her hands and her feet and her head because they're perfumed, they're poison. Hey, the dogs are smarter than you think they are. And so this is the end of Jezi. She bites the dust, and the beast devours her. And it's very, very gruesome. But she brings in an apostasy, the priests of Baal. She's not trying to get rid of the religion of Yahweh, and so they just mingle all together.
Thank you very much. And I want to ask my friend Douglas Woodward about this book. And I'm going to ask a loaded question.
All right.
Which is, what's the most important thing people should take out of this book? And this is in the context of all the debate that's been had about the nature of Babylon.
Right. Well, I think the main thing that we're putting forth for our readers to consider, one of the major elements of sort of the scenario that's been popular amongst evangelicals that study prophecy for the last 50 or 60 years, is that America isn't mentioned in the Bible prophecy at all. And so what my colleagues here, Doug, with his great knowledge of the Old Testament as well, has certainly helped me understand how America actually is inferred strongly in the first empire of Phoenicia, of Tyre and Sidon, an empire that was based primarily on commercial wealth that basically may have been traveling all of the seas and may have even been in America, as I argued the other day, actually mining copper and porting it back to Europe in 1000 BC. So there's many things that I think are fascinating. But the issue for most of you to think about is America omitted from Bible prophecy, or could America, in fact, be Mystery Babylon? Does it meet the attributes that are talked about by Jeremiah and by John the Revelator?
Other questions? You, sir.
Yes, gentlemen, in light of what it says in Jeremiah 50 and 51, where it talks about Babylon being destroyed, and as Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, complete destruction, it talks about that in Revelation chapter 18 as well.
Yes.
Could you address that as relating to the subject?
Okay, just to kind of repeat the question for the video. The question is, as Jeremiah describes in chapters 50 and 51, the destruction of the daughter of Babylon as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and could that be directly applied to, if we are proposing that America might be Mystery Babylon, could that apply to America? Could America be destroyed in that manner? And certainly, I don't know, Dean, what do you think? You think there's a possibility that the type of destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah might be what America could face?
Well, I mean, it certainly sounds that way because it says that it's destroyed in the space of 1 hour. So that's pretty fast and pretty catastrophic, whether it's by the hand of man or the hand of God. It will be destroyed completely.
Yeah, yeah. Doug?
I would say this,
Yeah.
to answer the question in a broader sense. What you have in Revelation 18 seems to indicate that Babylon, as a great commercial empire, which Krautheimer, Charles Krautheimer indicated that we're a different kind of an empire. In fact, he considers us the first truly commercial empire. We're not into colonizing like the British per se. We're not into gaining land. We have all these military bases, but that just protects, the waterways, and it keeps our commerce going. But we're a truly commercial empire. The only other truly commercial empire wasn't the British. The British did it differently, okay? But Tyre. Tyre was interested in commerce. They were truly a commercial empire. Now, we do ours through what we call democratic globalism, and we have that in this book right here. Democratic globalism is an expression that Krautheimer used, that is the instrumentality that we are using to extend our commercial empire. Are we into nation building? Yeah, sure, a little bit of here, a little bit there. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. Afghanistan, hello, right? So what we try to do here is to show very clearly, okay, that it appears that Babylon will persist until the very end. The vials are mentioned in Revelation 15. And then in Revelation 16, it says that Babylon is judged and that she falls into 3 parts. And we've indicated that part 1 is apostate Babylon, judged in Revelation 17, commercial Babylon in Revelation 18, and political Babylon, finally, the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire. And that's the end of the tripartite nature of Babylon.
I was going to ask Dean to speak to the issue of kind of what's the relationship between America's military, which is virtually ubiquitous, and its financial interest. And in your experience working kind of in and amongst the Foreign Service,
Right.
How did you see that come to pass? How does America leverage its military might and its commercial might?
Well, I mean, number one, we have 1,200 bases all around the world, which kind of guarantees our safety. But if you look back at this whole thing historically, at the end of World War II, we had the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan helped to rebuild Europe and Japan. And then we came to 1960 or so, and that was done. And so we said, now what we have to do is we have to help bring all these so-called underdeveloped countries up by their bootstraps. So we sent out the Peace Corps, and all these guys went around with their little briefcases and did a good thing, and they came back with their laptops, and they ran around the world making contracts with different governments, and these were, the governments viewed them as gifts, but they were loans. And they were loans that could never be paid back. And so we literally used the IMF and the World Bank. World Bank loaned the money, and most of this is all U.S. Money. And we loaned, and we used the IMF to go in and break kneecaps, kind of like the mafia. And so what we did is we tied, you may sit there and think that we're going broke overnight, but the rest of the world owes us so much money. It's unbelievable because we hooked them in. We would do a business plan, and I did this. We do a business plan, and we'd come back and, oh man, you can pay for this, no problem, and they really can't. And so they would end up owing, and pretty soon their biggest payment was to us,
Interest.
They couldn't do it, and so then they would bankrupt their country, throw away their currency, and so forth. The United States developed this just like tentacles, and then it not only goes out at the governmental level, but it goes out at the corporate level, because now that we're doing globalization, it doesn't matter where things are built. We can, build them out there, of course, cheaper, and bring it back in. The profits still come back to the corporation. So, you all may not be making a lot of money, but somebody is.
Dean, could you speak to the issue of the bourse? I guess is it called bourse, and the petrodollars?
The bourse.
Bourse, yeah, and the petrodollars, and what happens if someone like Saddam Hussein decides that he'd like to exchange euros rather than dollars?
Well, you just don't dare do that. The dollar is the world currency. It is the only reserve currency for the world. And if anybody wants to buy oil from whatever country, they have to convert to dollars. And, all this money is in dollars. And that's one of the things that has just kept our little empire going, You may say, we're going to debt. No, we're not really, because we're making all this money by all this trading that's going on around the world. When Saddam was going to go to the euro and out of the dollar, and I think that's probably the main reason they took him out, not just because he attacked Kuwait. I've been in Kuwait, been in those countries. But at any rate, I mean, it is our foreign policy that has governed our military policy. The reason we went into Afghanistan, so they say, is to build a pipeline through the country, and they wouldn't let us. So we took care of that, and we took care of Saddam, and we'll take care of anybody who gets in our way.
Someone like Iran that is wanting also to go away from the dollar and to go to euros. And so guess what might happen with Iran before too long?
Yeah.
I think we need to talk about the BRICS, the BRI, the BRICS, Dean.
Yeah, you explain who the BRICS are.
Well, the BRICS are Brazil, Russia,
Indonesia. And China.
Russia.
Yeah.
And Russia. And so these are the new developing nations. But they're all still tied into us. I mean, one of the reasons where everybody, this is probably jumping ahead, but everybody says we're going to fall. Well, if we catch a cold, as the saying goes, the world catches pneumonia. And so because everything is based on the dollar and on trade with the U.S., that is the best reason why this thing isn't coming down here overnight. Because if we came down, we'd bring the rest of the world with us.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the factors that we argue is really important. While the U.S. may be suffering economic hardship, compared to whom?
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Let's look at Southern Europe and what's going on there.
Absolutely.
And so people are still lined up to buy our treasury bills, basically treasury bonds. And so even though we're only paying 1% interest or something like that, but at least
It's gone way up. It's doubled.
Oh, has it? Is it 2%? Yeah. And
still
people
lining
are,
up.
of course, worried about just losing their principal. So interest is not the issue.
Gentlemen, I have a question for you to address, as you will.
Okay.
Someone comes to you and says, Babylon, that is that old city south of Baghdad, that's the real Babylon. That's prophesied as Babylon, and it will rise again. What do you say?
Yeah. You want to talk to that?
I would say that it'll probably take a couple of hundred years for that to happen at this stage. And I think we're a lot closer to the end of the age. I have a very good friend of mine here in Denver who's always telling me, listen, I know what the Bible says. It says that Babylon will be restored in the last days, and it's going to be right in Baghdad. And I said, well, it's really interesting because, the 82nd Airborne showed up at the old Babylonian center there and was guarding it.
It's basically a tourist center.
Kind of a tourist center that's kind of shot through a little bit. And then on the other hand, we've got this embassy called in the Green Zone. It's huge. It is just enormous. It's as big as the Vatican. It's in the Green Zone.
Which means it's in Baghdad, not Babylon.
It's in Baghdad.
Right.
But again, I want to draw your attention to the 800-pound gorilla on the bed, that we don't want to recognize that there is this gorilla on the bed. Do you feel this thing? It smells awful in here, and this thing keeps chattering and itching. I want to find out what's going on here. Bottom line is this, okay? For Babylon to be ignited as a great seaport commercial circumstance, do you understand how much it would take to do that? Now, there's some vessels going in and out. They've barely orchestrated a commercial agreement and seafaring agreement with Kuwait. No. This is an overwhelming, huge manifestation of commercial might and power. It is so obvious that if you're looking at the little cherry on the cake, you're missing the entire cake.
Yeah.
And,
Certainly,
you
Chuck
can't do
Missler
that.
talks about an alternative view
Yes, he does.
in chapter 50-51 of Jeremiah, where it talks about the daughter of Babylon, and he points out that those prophecies have never been fulfilled.
Right.
And so what does the conclusion he draws is, therefore, Babylon, historical Babylon, must be rebuilt. Our conclusion is different. Our conclusion is that Jeremiah wasn't prophesying about historical Babylon or about Neo-Babylon. He was prophesying about the world's final empire, the final Babylon, which we believe is the United States.
Having said that, on the cover, there's a picture of the U.S. Capitol, and there's a statue on the top of the U.S. Capitol. Let's talk about that woman on top of the U.S.
Minerva,
Capitol.
Libertas, who might that be? I think we know something about that.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit
Well,
about
I think you
that?
might be able to talk about that, but while you're at it, might as well throw in the god of Mars, who's
Yes.
guarding the doors into the Capitol building itself.
Right.
There are so many egregious expressions of the gods all over that building that when you get into it, Libertas in particular, Ishtar, and everything that this connotes and what the Statue of Liberty is made to symbolize is a, you know, for a born-again Christian to look at this thing with untinted glasses and realize the historicity of where all this has come from and the extreme Masonic engagement in the foundations of our nation and the symbols there too, and what Francis Bacon was all about in the New Atlantis and what was really happening in the creation of the United States of America. Now, granted, in the midst of all this, God in his great mercy was bringing people over here that would herald the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, fleeing religious persecution. And yet that was sort of, you know, a sidebar. Okay, Ben Franklin was trying to get us all to pray, and at the same time, he was over in London chopping up bodies. I mean, the incongruity of the whole thing is such an eye-opener, it's absolutely mind-boggling. Only 3 years ago, I came to this conclusion myself. I said, good grief, I'm supposed to be a teacher of history. And I haven't taught this in the public schools,
Right.
and I would never do this. Right? And maybe in a charter school I could get away with it. Okay, but you know, so the thing of it is that Doug, I mean, you got a lot more on this than we have, but we put a little bit of this out there, and it's sort of like I told 10 years ago when I started preaching on the Oracle of Damascus. I got a call from Damascus, and they said, "I dare you say that our city's going to become a heap of ruin." And she said, "Can you give us any other advice?" And I said, "Yeah, get out of Dodge fast."
Okay, Doug,
Yes.
let's talk about Columbia. Let's talk
Okay.
about
Yeah.
this woman.
Yes.
And you have spent a lot of time researching her.
Right. Well, and certainly there's mythology in some ways is confusing because the same God has many names and may be known by different names in different cultures. But you know, it's pretty clear that ultimately, whether you're talking about the Statue of Liberty or you're talking about Minerva on top of the Capitol, you're really dealing with this same sort of woman. And if you trace it back through the Bible, it really, and through classical mythology, what you see is the Queen of Heaven,
Right.
known as Ishtar, and Isis, and Venus.
What's she doing up on top of the Capitol building?
Well, clearly there's an intention on the part of the founders that somehow, in fact, it really goes, as Doug was talking about, it goes, you know, back to Francis Bacon about 400 or 500 years ago, but it actually goes all the way back to Plato.
Yes.
Back to the New Republic, and talking about the concept of mankind, humankind being ruled under reason. You know, the Greeks were really big on reason instead of revelation, under some type of a democratic republic rather than some type of tyrannical kingship or monarchy. And so the American experiment, which is I think what our founders were trying to symbolize, is that we're trying to fulfill this, you know, 3,000-year-old or 2,500-year-old ideal of creating the idyllic society, Plato's Republic. And so rather than, I've had this debate on the radio with a number of folks that argue, well, America's a Christian nation. One of the things we did is put together some of the work that Doug and Dean had done on the various founders of America. And we talk about that in a chapter very, very specifically, and talk about the fact that there's reasons to argue that, yes, America was and the founders did believe in some form of a God, and they were reverent to that God, but they certainly did not want to admit that that God was the God of the Bible or the God of Jesus Christ. And so Jefferson talks about nature's God and so forth in the Declaration of Independence. It's a stretch to suggest that that is the God of the Bible.
Well, you know, there were municipal goddesses in the old world.
Yes.
Athena, the goddess of Athens, you know, and she was supposed to protect the city.
Yes.
And she's kind of a mythological protector.
Yes,
So is
yes.
Columbia our mythological protector?
I think so. And there's, of course, David Ovason, actually a secular Freemason, actually wrote a book called Our Nation's Capital and the Architecture of Our Nation. And there's reasons to believe that the very architecture of the city of Washington, D.C. was set up so that the stars, Sirius, very important star, known as also as the dog star. That's where the dog days of summer come from, by the way, is when Sirius rises in the late summer. Typically now it rises almost in about September the 14th. It's that late in the summer. Used to be associated with the flooding of the Nile and the growing season, but of course the precession of the earth has caused that to move. So now the dog days are much, much later than they were, let's say 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. So anyway, the notion that the capital was actually structured in such a way to call upon the gods, classical gods. Tom Horn, of course, does a wonderful job at Napoleon Rising 2012, which you've visited with Tom many times about this. But the possibility that the Washington Monument has actually a Bible, and there was a binding of the Bible so that the God of Christianity would not be loosed upon our nation, but would be bound. So there's a very, very deep occultic, mystical story to be told, and it's available. It's by a number of people.
Does
Yes.
anyone out there have a question?
I'm a homeschool mom of 10, and in the homeschool movement, you are fed/brainwashed David Barton's Christian Heritage
Right.
of America.
Oh, don't get us started. Oh, don't get us started. Now, Doug, take a deep breath and wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. All right? Yes.
My question is this. In light of that, do you think the whole patriotic movement was possibly the religion of New Babylon from the beginning? In other words, has that always been the agenda? This is going to be New Babylon, and possibly our founding fathers knew it. Is it morphing into it, or has that always been the hoax?
Wow.
One nation under God is lowercase g God, not a...
Great question.
That's a great question. There's-
And I think she answered it too.
Yes, I like those kinds of questions. Oh, I now know the answer to your question. We probably should unpack your question because there's really several sort of very interesting questions there.
Right.
Maybe the first thing, talk a little bit about David Barton, American patriotism, and well, you're an educator. You're the educator, so you should talk about that.
the organizations with David Barton and the many others that are on the wall builders, and we can go on and on. They're all kind of interconnected in a way that is pretty astounding. And if you know your history and you really get into your history, I've always known about the seamy part of the Illuminati and the Masons and their involvement. When our new high school opened up, I was there. And what did everybody want to do? They brought in the Masons, and we laid the cornerstone. How many have ever seen the ceremony? I mean, actually, when you open up a new school, you know what I'm talking about. I think, what in the world is this? You know, sort of out of nowhere, here comes these funny little guys, and
With
they do
their
this
aprons, right?
with their aprons and the
yes.
whole thing, and they do this thing, and I'm looking at this, and I'm going, okay, whatever, right? And so what we did is this. Remember the principle. The principle is this. The religion of Yahweh, if I could say that phrase, which is the true religion, okay? Then you get these Tyranians that come in. Hey, we can do both. It is a mixture. You see, the mixture of Ishtar follows. It comes into Christendom, if you would. It comes in. It's like the dirt clod on the wedding cake, the Capitol building, okay? You throw this dirt clod up there, and you walk into the thing and say, who's this guy on the right side? Hey, that's Mars. Have you noticed him? He really fits, doesn't he?
Just a quick point to interrupt you just for a second. a quick point is that you've done a great job, I think, identifying Jezebel and Ahab in that same way in terms of that connection between religion and politics, and that is a key element of Babylon, is an empire that combines religion. That's what Jezebel and
That's
Ahab
right.
were trying to do, was apostatize Hebrew religion by bringing Baal into the temple worship and so forth. But go ahead and talk about
But
Barden a bit.
historical revisionism is not just a Nazi circumstance. Okay, historical revisionism, like the Jews never went to the chambers. This never happened. And with Ahmadinejad and his little denial of the Holocaust and getting rid of world Zionism and so forth and so on. No, what we have here, probably on the benign side, I would say that what he's trying to do, what David's trying to do, is to put a very glossy presentation of Christianity. There is no question that the Puritans were here. There were godly people here the whole time. Now, here's where I want to bring this up to date if I could, just a little bit, and that is this. When Elijah came and stood off with the prophets of Baal, okay, there was a guy that was the spiritual advisor to King Ahab, and he says, I have known the Lord from my youth. And didn't I hide the prophets of the Lord in the caves? I put 50 in this cave. I put 50 in this cave. I mean, what a witness, right? And I preserved them, and I fed them bread and water. And now you're telling me that you've come back to deal with Ahab, and you want me to tell him you're here. He's going to kill me, right? And but look what I've done. And so where are the prophets today? Where are the prophets of the Lord? They're hiding in these caves. And I know what happens scientifically when you wander around in a cave for a long time. What happens to your eyesight? You go blind. Okay? So they're in there blind as a bat. But they're the great testimony of the Lord. So here comes Elijah. And in the spirit of Elijah, today, brothers and sisters, God is calling us to take a stand.
Amen.
And we're going to face off the priests of Baal. And that's what's going to happen. And we're going to have it, and we're going to have it out with them. Yeah. And this is where we are today, the testimony of Jesus. And Baal is out there. Yeah. And he's coming out real strong. So what are we going to do? Circle the wagons and hide in the ditch? Or are we going to go out there and say, all right, let's go. Let's have it out.
Yeah.
Bring it on. And only by the power of the living God can we do this.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just a quick question or just a comment is that our worst enemy may be what we would have thought would be our closest friends, evangelicals that have denied the doctrine of evil, that just believe that salvation is good information. It used to be called Gnosticism a couple thousand years ago. It's just good information. And sin and not living a healthy life is just bad information.
You, sir.
Doug and I had a good talk yesterday, or
Yep.
2 days ago,
Yep.
and it seems like, following up on what you said, that we're kind of living in the matrix.
Yes.
And
Time to wake up,
Good
right?
analogy.
that is,
Yeah.
and it's all revisionistic history going on, and that's part of the matrix that the church has been brainwashed with.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've learned growing up in public schools, most of us,
Yes.
my age,
Yep.
and so could you comment about that, the matrix?
I was thinking I might comment about the chapter we write because we haven't really talked about it. We have a chapter on Hitler and how Hitler sort of co-opted the church, both the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Protestant Church in Germany. And Doug had done some great research. In fact, I've done so much research on the Nazis that one of the guys came up and said, "Oh, you're the Nazi guy."
Not really, not really.
So, well, no, I'm not exactly, but thank you for that appellation. I appreciate that.
Is that what that was?
So, yeah, I guess. Maybe some people have maybe called me something worse. But be that as it may, what we really point out is the history of how Hitler went in and undercut the church and how he made patriotism and spirituality, he linked those two together. And so why did a Rudolf Bultmann, who was a famous theologian, sign the concordant with the Nazis? Why did the priests and so forth? Well, because it looked like that patriotism and spirituality were kind of one and the same thing. And so the challenge we point out, now this is the only point I'll make here, is just that we have to be, as Christians, very discerning. We have to remember the word divides between soul and spirit. We have to make sure that our patriotism, there's nothing wrong with being loyal to our country, but we need to make sure that we're not silly about that patriotism, and that we sort of assume anything that our government does is good or right, or that American is exceptionalism, the last and best hope for the world. You know, the world doesn't really agree with that. Yeah.
Let me just add one thing to what he just said, and that is the picture of this is in Revelation 17, where the woman, the church, is riding the beast, the political system. And so if we think we're ever going to get anywhere through aligning ourselves with the state, we better be very, very careful, because the old 501c3s are entities of the state, not,
IRS is kind of doing something to that too, isn't
Yeah,
it? Lately.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you stand up, please? There's a lady in the back.
Hi.
Guys, well, okay, so you guys are all such intellectuals that I have to say, you just went over my head.
Where?
Who? Okay. Yes.
I want to hear about the woman on top of the White House.
The woman on top of the White House. Oh, we didn't really answer who that is?
Exactly.
Libertas and Minerva. Yeah. Well, Gary, I might even turn to you. You might give a better answer for it than I might give. But certainly is Libertas. And
Well,
so
the
forth.
history of that woman is fascinating. She goes all the way back to Joseph in Egypt. And Joseph married the daughter of an Egyptian priest, the high priest of Thebes. And her name was Asenath. Her name later became transmuted into the Roman Minerva, and Athena we talked about. She's the municipal protector goddess. Well, what was Joseph doing marrying a woman like Asenath? Because God wanted to send down to us a message about future prophecy, that essentially the godly and the ungodly would merge together in the latter days.
Yes.
And in a sense, she was redeemed by Joseph, because Joseph's a type of Christ. In another sense, there's this mystical marriage of the occult and the righteous. And this comes right down to us today.
Yes.
Amen.
Yes.
That's good.
Here,
That's
so you
right.
can see that that we may be intellectuals, but Gary's the true scholar.
Yes. Let's keep it straight here, buddy.
Please.
Oh yes. Oh, do tell. Did you have a question? Oh no. Okay.
Somebody
Sorry.
back here.
All right.
You did.
Yes, sir. Could you stand up and tell us your
Yeah, I'm
question?
just wondering if America's the final Babylon, how does the Antichrist relate to America if he's from the Roman Empire? Will he reside in America or Washington or New York or Florida and Southern Jerusalem?
Okay.
Let me take it.
You might kind of repeat the question.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, so the question is, if America is the final Babylon, how does the Antichrist relate to that? Does the Antichrist take up sort of his capital? Is it in Washington or New York or some combination? That's the question, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. Okay, Dean, do you want to talk to that for a moment?
Sure.
Okay.
That's really one of the key questions to this whole thing. I mean, the answer simply is yes. He is the head of a country. He would be the head of that final Babylon. He is the one that signs a treaty with Israel, the Antichrist. But I think one of the things that we need to consider, and as Americans, we're very ethnocentric. You know, we only see America. We see the McDonald's down the way and everything, but we don't see the rest of the world very, very clearly. And one of the things I would propose, and we bring it up in the book, is that you're all European, and I am too. And you really are too. You've been grafted in, you know.
You've been grafted in,
You know,
whether you like it or not.
So, you know, because what are we? You know, you have to, we look at ourselves and we think, we're different. We're not Europe. Yeah, I'm sorry, but we are. We could possibly be that little horn out of the 10 that comes up and dominates the other 10. And we are European in language, in blood, in politics, in religion, in law, in every way. You know, we're an extension of Europe, and so is Canada, and so is Australia, New Zealand. I mean, you know, it's just the way it is. And so God looks at peoples. He doesn't look at boundaries. So we have to really expand our thinking, and then we have to look at the fact that miraculously, since really the 1800s, America has been the number one power of the world. It didn't take that stand until about 1900, but it was already the commercial and economic big kahuna, the elephant, the colossus. And we dwarf Europe, which can't get along with itself, can't pay for itself, can't do anything. So, for everybody expecting Europe to miraculously come together, well, that hasn't happened for 2,000 years. But we melted, and we came together, and we have come up with one heck of a machine.
And we are also called a mixed multitude.
A mingled people.
A mingled people.
Yeah.
And that is a characteristic of this nation, and you'll find that with Australia and some of the other cubs.
Yes.
That you're going to find a mixed people there. In England, if you've gone to England, you'll see a kind of a mixed multitude. Whereas in most of the nations, you don't quite see it. In Brazil a little bit, but the fact of the matter is you've got this mixed multitude, and Babylon is that mixed multitude.
Just a comment I'd make is the whole issue of eugenics. We like to point to Germany, and we like to say, well, this was Hitler's ideology, and Hitler was responsible for the Holocaust. But a lecture I do talks about how it was America, and it was the ideology of America that actually gave the background to Hitler. Hitler in Mein Kampf talked about Oliver Wendell Holmes and his decision in Buck versus Bell to basically say it was okay to take away the opportunity for the poor and the less desirable people, to basically eliminate their opportunity to have children. So it was America that came up with the concept of race and blood. The Germans talked about the Aryan race. The Americans talked about the Nordic race. And it meant absolutely that we only wanted blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in America. And it's I could go on and on. I have a whole lecture to talk about this. But the point is that America and Germany were the two preeminent nations that worked together to put forward the basis for transhumanism. And there was absolute collaboration between the two. So, and I talk about that in, of course, some of my books. Gary?
Gentlemen, here's a question. Bounce this around between you, among you, and that is the dollar. The little S with the two lines through it. People are very worried about the dollar today. Some are saying, buy gold, buy gold. You see it when you turn on the television. People are worried about the dollar. And I notice in your book you spend quite a bit of time talking about the dollar.
Yeah. Well,
what's going to happen?
Yeah. This is your question.
Oh, okay.
Now you can talk about the dinar if you want to, but it's not about the dollar. Yeah.
The old IQD. At any rate, the dollar, the greenback, is golden. Its image in the world since the very get-go has been, you can trust it. You can trust it. And it is almost supernatural in the sense that I have relatives that live in Ecuador, but they bank at Citibank in New York. I have, everybody in South America has a bank account here because they can trust that their money's going to be okay. And as we know, we talked earlier, the euro, the oil is based on the dollar, and all of our trade is based upon the dollar. And so I guess the question is, are we going to inflate it out of existence? Well, someday we probably will. That'll give us a good opportunity to come up with a really cool idea, Marx and things like that. But for now, again, if as he said earlier, if we have a sale of our debt, and we have a lot of debt, then the world comes up and they get it in line to try and buy it, and there are 3 times as many countries, people, corporations that are trying to buy our debt than there is available. Oh, you mean you only have 100 billion today? I want it, and we don't have enough to go around, and people want it, and countries want it, and they covet it.
Dean, speak to the fact that while we are an energy consumer, we're soon likely to become an energy supplier.
Right.
And what that bodes for sort of not just a rehabilitation, but kind of a reboosting of America's economy.
Yeah, I have to make a confession that a couple years ago, I was one of these peak oil guys. And help, we're going to run out of oil. We're going to, we're going to go back to the Stone Age. And then all of a sudden, they started making all these discoveries, and through fracking and this and that, they're able to, and I've talked to some people here that are doing this in Canada and so forth. And all of a sudden we have found reserves of oil, not just in the United States, but around the world. But let me just give you one example. The amount of oil in Saudi Arabia, which was the #1 in reserves in the world, was 262 billion. Now they've been bringing out oil at around $10 million barrels a day for about 50 years, and that number has never gone down. It's kind of a strange little math thing going on. But we have three oil fields that are shale oil fields here in the United States, and according to the USGS, they have 1.2 trillion barrels of oil in them. And then there's oil that we'll probably never see in the Gulf or in Florida and off of the coast of California and here and there in Alaska and everything. But the point is that we will this year become probably the world's largest exporter of oil, the largest producer of oil and natural gas and so forth. So we have so much. Then they've discovered oil, in Brazil and Australia, and through fracking, they're able to bring out, twice as much as they ever took out. And so this is helping little countries like Venezuela and Mexico and Brazil, and everybody's just rolling in it. So in a sense, this is going to hold off the financial crash because we've got there's resources there, and we're spending less money, and we're going to have lower debt in spite of policies of certain administrations.
How does this fit Bible prophecy?
Well, I mean, it's really funny. I say because this country, if it is the final Babylon, this is one conclusion I used to make, and I was telling Jerry, who was in the little booth, Robinson, who's in the booth next to us. I wrote exactly what you wrote in your book 10 years ago, and finally I realized that I always thought America was Babylon. If America is Babylon, then it can't crash and burn. It just can't. So I firmly believe that it is, and for that reason, it isn't going to crash and burn.
Jerry's written, by the way, a fabulous book. It's
Yeah,
absolutely
it's
great, but it's kind of along the lines of what Mark Twain said. Or was it Will Rogers? I forget. Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated.
Yeah.
That was
Yes.
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes. The rumors and all the writing that's been done about the dollar is going to crash. The dollar is going to crash. Well, someday it may, but it may
probably
be at
will.
the very end of the tribulation period, not at its beginning.
Well, I mean, it's a good thing to
that's
happen
no
in the
problem.
middle because it sets up
Yes.
things for the mark of the beast.
Good. It very
But in the meanwhile, it's not going anywhere. And
In our opinion.
in our humble,
Very
humble opinion.
In our very humble opinion.
Yes.
Now, speaking about a humble opinion, I would say one thing here. Remember that when basically she was the queen of heaven and Ishtar, when Jezebel came down and started the temple of Baal. Now, this is the way it was done. The merchants would come in, and these great priests of Baal, male and female, you wonder how this was done. They would trade, and they would have to get words from the gods. These priests were not just standing around doing a little worship thing. They were fornicating with the priests of Baal and Ishtar, getting and channeling while this is going on. What is my deal going to look like? I'm harvesting corn. I'm doing this. I'm trading in this and trading in that. So when you get to the Revelation, and it talks about all the fornication and the harlotries and the merchants, and you're thinking, what's all this going on? Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly what was going on with Baal and the priests of Baal, and both male and both female. And this is why at the end of 70 years, Tyre will come back to her hire and fornicate with all the kings on the whole face of the earth. Has that happened, or is that happening?
Yes. Well
See?
said.
You, sir.
Yes, sir.
You talked about some necessary stability in the economic realm for us to go into the future according to the book. What about politically? There's a lot of voices talking about upheaval politically, and do you see us really moving forward with the economy still in place with much the same style of government that we have these days? Or is there room for some radical adjustments in that moving forward and maintain the same economy?
Well, aren't we a democracy today? And isn't our government working functionally, as we intended it, as the founders intended? I asked that, of course, very cynically. Yeah. Well, I'll just make a quick comment, and then Dean probably is the right person to answer. But obviously, our current president is could be called an imperial presidency. He's ruling predominantly by executive orders, in part because Congress is so dysfunctional, And so certainly the form of government we have today is very different than what the founders intended. So, in a sense, I don't think it would ever be a pure dictatorship, but our government already is looking very different than what we hoped for.
Are you saying, would there be a revolution? Are you asking? That's part of it? Okay. Okay.
Participate in that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, and
We're not calling for a revolution, folks, just to go on record for the viewing audience, okay?
Tell us how you really feel.
Yes.
Yeah, tell us how you really feel. I wouldn't blame you, but on the other hand, we have seen pictures of Humvees and armored vehicles and so forth being staged all over the United States. There are FEMA camps, there are things. And I'm sorry, my little pea-shooter 38 isn't going to do much against the big guns. I'm sorry, So I think he who has gun rules, unfortunately. And again, if I would come back to the same thing as I said on the economy. If this is Babylon, the final Babylon, there ain't nothing going to stop it.
And I would say this too. What happened in Nazi Germany was an issue that for security's sake, listen to me now, for security's sake, the people were more than willing to give up their freedoms. And you see, when that happens to a people and they're so security oriented, they will do anything to be protected from terrorism. We have been willing to give up so many freedoms, and now we're finding out, oh my goodness, they're really actually spying on us. What is going on? And they're doing this in a big way. This is not happening in a corner somewhere. We walked into that salad bar the other day, and there was this giant sign over there that said, hey, look at that sign over there. And I didn't see a camera. It says, you are being watched. And I go, oh, grief. Then I got this phone, I get in the car, and I'm looking at the TV. I'm doing this. Hey, I'm over here, Hey, it's over. It's over. Hey, you notice I'm losing some weight now. Okay, so we've got this notion, what's done in secret, there's nothing done in secret hardly anymore. I mean, this is at a point, but hey, we're willing. Let's give it up. Hey, if it takes me an hour and a half to get into the stadium so I won't get bombed, hey, whatever, right? So we're a frog, and we're in this pot, and it's boiling, but it feels kind of good. And we're going, and after a while,
she's
gone. It's a jacuzzi that went wild.
Yeah.
And
it just a comment I'd make, Doug, is it really calls for discernment, because while we talk about the Nazis and that they were fascists, I make the point in my books that just remember the definition of fascism is the large corporations and the government working in such a way that the large corporations have the big advantage, and that the small business people really don't have the advantage, and that there's so much collusion between the big corporations and the government that it's very difficult for the little guy and difficult for the middle class to thrive. So we're just about out of time, aren't we?
Gentlemen, we are, but we have time for maybe one more really good question.
Yes. Yes, sir.
What is your opinion on all of our presidents being related?
On the fact that all the presidents have a relationship, I would add, that they all come kind of from a genetic ancestry. Gary, this is something a great deal about. In terms of the work you've done, the work JR did.
Studies of peerage.
Yes.
Burke's peerage.
Yes.
Link the leaders of the world together in remarkable ways. They're all cousins. And this really goes back to a conspiracy that in the ruling kings of Europe, who descend in turn from the royal houses of Rome. This is
Yes.
a 2,000-year-old lineage.
The kings of the earth, that phrase that's used in the
Kings
scripture,
of the earth.
all the way back to Psalm 2, one of the key messianic prophecies
Right.
in Psalm 2. The kings of the earth sit at my footstool until I make until I make the enemies a footstool for thy feet. That is such a key phrase to trace that through the scripture. And that is really the opposite
Yeah.
of the kingdom of God.
And the idea of Babylon is a false kingdom. That's really what lies at the center.
Yes. There's
Amen.
two kingdoms, there's two cities, and they are at war with one another. And ultimately, that great city, divided into three parts, is the power base from which the Antichrist, the beast, takes control. And so we're just asking you to recognize that America may be that great city.
She was at one time a golden cup in the hand of the Lord, but now she has become full of putridity. And that fullness is going to be manifested in more ways than one. We've talked with a lot of the folks here about the iniquity of the Amorites will be fulfilled and complete. And just when is that? Was that at the time of Israel's first taking of the land, or do we think that that could possibly extend until the very 70th week of Daniel? There's some biblical evidence to that.
And that's a great point to leave on, because we can also connect to the fact that that involves the Nephilim.
Yes,
And if we didn't bring
absolutely.
the Nephilim into this, it just wouldn't be part of this whole story, right?
That's right.
And I say that jokingly.
Thank you all for attending.